Today's stream is about to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Hi, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and let's write some code together, shall we? But we have on the menu today something different. We were working on the waveform display for the longest time. Then we tried to do a plugin using it, but it is a bit buggy. I decided to do something different and fun to take that bad taste out of the mouth. And because it has to do with the design of audio effects. In case you are new here, we are on this long journey of developing a library for audio effects in REAPER. And we are mostly focusing on things that have to do with visualization, showing what the effect does to the audio. And one of the things that the library comes with is a design system that helps people develop better looking effects because they will have a predefined set of spacing, predefined set of colors to use, and that sort of thing. And that's how people design user interfaces, by having these kinds of palettes. And one thing that I was not happy with was choice of fonts. Because in JSFX, as far as I understand, we are not capable of shipping our own fonts. So we have to rely on what's installed on the system, which means relying on the system fonts. They're not awesome, but they are not terrible either. The problem is even worse because, as far as I knew before this stream, it's not possible to detect which operating system you're using. So I had to choose the same font that everyone else chooses when they're developing JSFX. It is the font that seems to be the only one available on Windows and macOS and most Linux distributions, and that's Arial. It's not the worst font, but it's not great. And then I came upon this post by Tail, who is part of our little community here on the channel. So shout out to Tail. And oh, speaking of our little community, Bo is here. Hello, Bo. It's great to have you here. I hope you enjoyed this. It has more to do with the design part of things. And I know that you are into design. I know that you are a designer, in fact. So I hope you like this one. So anyway, Tail and other people on this thread talk about this issue. It's actually an issue that people were trying to fix. So when you're displaying a number, the number is rounded differently on Windows and macOS. And I believe that Linux behaves the same as macOS because they're both Unix based. So that's interesting. It's actually an issue when you're displaying values. You want the values to be consistent. Oh, and Tail is watching. So hello, Tail. Yes, we are using your post from 7 years ago in this stream. Very clever guy, this Tail that I keep talking about. Anyway, it's an issue when you're trying to display a value and it shows up differently in different... Oh, it can be an issue when it shows up differently in different operating systems. And the person was trying to detect the operating system to show things more consistently. But I decided that instead I want to exploit this quirk to detect the operating system so that I can use the system fonts from the different operating systems and choose fonts that are better than Arial. or at least fonts that are not so massively overused as Arial is. In fact, there is a chance that even this plain forum template here is using Arial. No, it's not. It's using OpenSense. Anyway, so let's get into what is this quirk that allows you to differentiate between operating systems. Perhaps this should be a feature in JS Effects because it can be useful in other ways. Maybe. That's the font thing is the only thing that came to my mind when I saw this. Maybe detecting operating systems can be useful in other ways. Whatever the case may be. The trick is you take, and this is what this line is doing. You take a number, 1/2, and you convert that number into a string. So you format that number as a string. This is just saying, I really don't care about the string. We are discarding the string. Because sprintf also returns the string. So this is one of those parameters as outputs kind of thing. We are ignoring this position. But we still have to pass a dummy value into there. So we are passing this dummy string name. This is the interesting bit. So we are rounding 1/2, and we are using as the format string. We want it to be formatted as a floating point, and we want 0 decimal points. In other words, we want to take this 1/2 and round it to the nearest integer because we want 0 decimal points. That's an integer, right? That's an integer number. And that's what this expression is going to do. And this is where lies the difference between Windows and macOS/Linux. The way that JS Effects itself implements this operation of sprintf is by relying on lower level facilities of the languages in which JS Effects itself is implemented. So JS Effects, as well as most of REAPER, is implemented in C++. And this is relying actually on probably on a facility that is even older than C++, because this sort of behavior dates back to the earliest days of C. In any case, the implementations of C/C++ in the different operating systems are different. On Windows, it is the MSVCRT, the Microsoft Visual C++ runtime. While in Linux, it's glibc, and in macOS, it's probably something else. I don't really know. It probably follows the behavior of glibc. It doesn't matter. What matters is the different, and all I'm saying here is the contents of this thread. I'm probably just explaining this in more detail. But this insight that the difference lies in the implementations of the C++ standard library, all of this is insight that came from this thread. In fact, this comparison of glibc and MSVCRT was written by Justin, creator of REAPER. Anyway, so these two different operating systems, Windows and macOS/Linux, will round this differently. And one is going to round down, so 1/2 is going to become 0. One is going to round up, 1/2 is going to become 1. And this is the little trick that helps you differentiate from Windows to macOS in JS Effects. Super cool. And the rest of this expression is nothing interesting. It's just using string compare to compare the output of this rounding to 1. So this is the line I came up with based on Tails' line. I just compare. I just run the string compare, and on Windows, this is going to return 0. And in macOS, it's going to return -1. I haven't tested on Linux. I tested on Windows. I tested on macOS off camera. And it works. It continues to work, even though my macOS is the M1 processor and I am running REAPER as a native binary. I'm not going through Rosetta. So even in that case, it doesn't matter. it still works. This is still -1 in macOS. I believe that in Linux we would get the same result, -1. But to be honest, I'm not going to worry about Linux too much when it comes down to fonts. I will support Windows, and we'll select some good fonts for Windows. I will support macOS, and we'll select some good fonts, some good system fonts in macOS to be part of the design system. And we are just going to let Linux people live with whatever is the fallback font for JSFX in Linux. So I tried, and we are going to explore all this today. I tried to set a font that does not exist. And what Reaper does in that case is just use a fallback font. So in Linux, it's fine. You're going to use a fallback font. On Windows and in macOS, it's going to look a little bit better, hopefully, because it will be using a system font that we, designers of the effects, have chosen. And because we are limited to system fonts, that's not ideal from a designer. From a design perspective, we probably would like to have more control over fonts. But it can also be a good thing because the fonts are going to be consistent with the rest of the operating system for the most part. Right, so this is the line that I wrote when testing things, and it seems to work. So let's give this a spin again for the sake of demonstration. So this is that line, and this should be false because we are not on Windows, we are running macOS. So let me get Reaper open and let's run this effect and take a look. And it is false. 0 means false in JSFX. So is this Windows? False. It's not. It's macOS. Great. Let's bring this line into the library. And this is one of those lines that we don't really have to be careful about. I guess it can be just one constant. There are some variables that we have to be careful about. We have to define them in the GFX block because some GFX facilities are only available there and so on. But this one, we can just drop here. It will be running in the scope of the init section. And that's good enough for this purpose. So that's it. That's a simple line. Well, I would say that this is a short line, but it's not really simple. It gets very tricky and complicated as to why this works. In fact, so much so that I think it's worth keeping the link to Dale's post here for posterity. And I guess I will even give it a section like operating system detection. And now let's use this line in the design system. The design system is something that needs GFX facilities to be defined. So the design system is actually defined over here, where there is this block of code that only runs when the GFX block is ready to run. Let's find the place where we do font stuff, which is right here. It's right at the top. And then let's look at some fonts actually. Let's look at some fonts and see what are some fonts that look good and that make sense. I made already a pre-selection because I was testing this concept. So this is what I came up with. And I think that we are not going to use this exactly. We're just going to get the fonts from here, but let's go to another effect that we have going on that has more text than just this. So I guess one example of this may be the waveform display itself, because we have the instructions there. I'll open it and we'll see what it looks like right now. Yeah, so this is what it looks like right now. There are these instructions here, and I guess we'll make a copy of this because we'll be playing around with the fonts. This will be called Fonts Design System. And it's yet one more thing that we will want to delete at some point. Let's have a slider that will be slider 13. That will be our choice of font. So you may be wondering, how did I come up with this list? Well, in macOS, as well as on Windows, there are applications that show you all the fonts in the operating system. On Windows, it's under Settings. In macOS, there is this app called Fontbook that comes with macOS. And it lists all the fonts you have installed, and even some fonts that you may get if you want. You may download this font. These are fonts that sometimes are for different languages that probably I don't speak and don't care about. Or they are fonts that are used in some documents. Like, for instance, when you try to open a new document on Pages or Numbers or Keynote and so forth, you get presented a screen that looks like this, and there are all these templates to get you started. So some of these fonts that are used in templates are not real, they don't really come with the operating system. Because, I don't know, maybe they're trying to save space on 500K of a font on an operating system that is like, what, 60 gigabytes. Gotta save that space. So whatever, there are some fonts that are not installed. I don't want to depend on those. In fact, I don't know which templates I have already opened in Pages, so I don't really know the list that comes enabled by default in the operating system. I just went over the list, I looked at all of them, and I was like, okay, you look good enough. And also there are some things that are well known. For instance, Ableton Live notoriously uses Futura for everything. So I included that one because maybe you want your JS effects to sort of resemble Ableton's effects, which is actually okay. I like the design of Ableton's built-in effects. So maybe you want to go for that, and then you can use Futura. In macOS, on Windows, Futura is not embedded. It doesn't come with the operating system. But I think that this one comes. I don't think I enable this. I didn't download it. It's not an extra. It just comes with. And then I went over the list, and you don't have to watch me go over the list. So that's why I did it off camera. And I came up with this little list. Let's take a look and really confirm that we want these things, that these are good fonts to include. And if they are, let's bring them into the design system and create constants for them and whatnot. Anyway, so I will want to have this list. Over there. And then we can set, so in our library, we are setting the font. Where do we do that? Over here. There you go. This is the line that we will want to change. For now, I'm just going to comment it out. So that we can control the fonts externally. And then let's find where we are printing instructions, which is right here. And then this is the index of the font. This is the size of the font, which I guess can be this size. This is the style, which can be regular. And then the font family. Previously, we didn't give an option for that. Now we are going to give an option for that. The option is going to be based on font in this case. Okay, and in case you are wondering, to use different fonts, you just have to give their name as long as the name matches what we saw on font book, it will work. For the most part, for most fonts. I think that there are one or two that didn't work in my tests, probably because some fonts are called like Futura Medium and others are like Futura Regular, that sort of thing. So if the name cannot be picked up correctly, then sometimes Reaper doesn't work well and doesn't render the font correctly. But for these ones, I think it will render everything correctly. We will need to increase these numbers though. Just like that. So I think that this should do. Let's take a look. Oh, I cannot have a function with an empty body, so I'll just drop in a dummy value here. Otherwise, there is a syntax error in the program. Okay, so these are the instructions with Arial, which is what we started with. And now let's flick through and see if we like these options. If you put a gray, light gray kind of background, then you'll clearly see Ableton stuff coming through. Interesting. I think that the designers out there will not like to hear this, but given the constraints of the system, given the constraints of JS effects, there is no simple way for me to define line height. There are ways. We did something similar for letter spacing, which can be handy for things like titles like this in all caps. So there is a bit of a hack to do letter spacing. We could extend that hack. We haven't, but could extend that hack to do line height. But it gets annoying and potentially slow too. So instead, I'm just relying on the fact it's a convenient trick that, unlike most other programming languages, in JS effects you can do a double quote and then your string can have new lines in there. In most languages, I guess new lines would also be allowed, but you would have to write them like this, and who wants to live like that? You would have to do something like this. It's terrible. But in JS effects, it's very convenient that you don't have to put the new lines explicitly. You can just type in a new line. And JS Effects is going to realize, okay, I didn't see a double quote yet, so I guess we are continuing this string, which is great. Most languages are not like that. Or most languages at least would require you to use a different delimiter for that kind of interpretation. And I guess the other nice thing is that I'm using quotes here that are not just straight quotes, so I don't have to escape them. Anyway, I am not going to do line height as a first-class citizen, because it is annoying. potentially slow as well. So instead, I'm just going to rely on the fact that I can do this trick of having multiple lines on a string in JS effects. I think this is a fine compromise. The downside is that because I don't have control over line height, I will have to depend on the line height of the font. When you are creating a font, you can specify the line height of the font. In fact, you can specify the bounding box for each character, you can specify kerning and whatnot. It gets quite tricky. Typography is complicated. But anyway, the default line height of Arial in macOS, at least when rendered by Reaper this way, seems to work better than Helvetica. And that is controversial because I am saying that Arial is looking better than Helvetica. And for those who don't know, Arial is based on Helvetica. I think it was Microsoft who wanted Helvetica but didn't want to license Helvetica, so they hired a type designer. I think it was Matthew Carter, but I may be wrong. Anyway, they hired this type designer to make Helvetica look like something that is not Helvetica so that they could use it without... I don't know if this is the true story. But anyway, the story goes that they could use Helvetica without paying for it. And that's what Arial is. So they make... Helvetica is a good font, but Arial is like Helvetica with some bad decisions baked in on purpose for licensing reasons. But in this case, it turns out that the line height actually works better, at least to my eyes. It works better in Arial. I do like the extra line height. So I guess in our design system, we may include Arial and not Helvetica. Maybe Helvetica New will be better. Yeah, I think I prefer Helvetica New over Arial. But Helvetica non-new, I will keep out. And then PT Sams. That's a font that I actually think looks fine. It is not super popular. It is popular, don't get me wrong, but it's not super popular, which means that it's not overly... It's not tiring, it's not overly used. And PT Mono is one that I really like. And there is also Menlo that works well. And I kind of like this mono-spaced aesthetics. I think it may look good on labels on JS effects. So I think I'm going to include this one. I may include Menlo as well. I don't remember why I didn't include it, but let's throw Menlo in there. I will put it as the last one. And I also tried, for the typographers out there who will know about this, I also tried San Francisco Mono, and it did not work. Reaper didn't pick it up, which I guess makes sense, because San Francisco Mono is supposed to be, or San Francisco Sans and Mono are supposed to be system fonts that are hidden from you so that you don't try to use them too much. And Apple wants to have tighter control over the use of San Francisco. The licensing is weird too. Anyway, so San Francisco is not an option for us. So San Francisco would be a nice option because it blends with the rest of the operating system. Like these menus are using San Francisco, but alas, that's not possible. Okay, let's see. If the font weight isn't specified, it's supposed to default to medium or book. Yes, and there is something to be said, and this dates back to when I was talking about the name you have to use, which needs to match what you find in Fontbook. It is supposed to default to this, and it is supposed to pick up names like bold, italic. In my experience, Reaper doesn't always get it right. I don't even know what Reaper is using to pick up fonts from the operating system. There are different ways of doing that. Probably Reaper is doing something weird and custom because it is cross-platform. It gets weird and complicated. I will just try, and if we can like have 4 or 5 options that look good, that's good enough. That's already more than just Arial everywhere, which is, as far as I know, what everyone does in JS effects. Now, of course, there are people who have images like a faceplate of a compressor or something, and then they will be using different fonts. But that's not an ergonomic or viable approach for things like labels on knobs, where you want the value to change. It is viable to have an image with like labels on knobs that say maybe like ratio or attack and release, that sort of thing, because it doesn't change, and that's okay. But if you want your value to change, like you are showing the number of dB or you're showing the number of milliseconds in some attack and release sort of thing, if you want the number to change, it's still possible to do that with images. You would have to have an image that is like a sprite map of all the characters, but it gets super annoying, probably slow. I don't think anyone ever does that. And if you look for fonts that people use in other JS effects, you'll see that everyone is using Arial. Well, I guess one person is not. But this font is a system font on Windows, so I think that this will not render super nice in macOS. And other than that, oh, I guess there is a notion of different fonts here in Gerent's library as well. But most people are using Arial, that's for sure. Even Psyche. Oh, this one is using Tahoma just in one place. And that's only gonna work on Windows, I think. But I suppose that the fallback will be Arial, so you won't be able to tell. Yeah, but I think I'm fairly confident that we are the first people to exploit this quirk of glibc versus MSVCRT for font purposes. Anyway. Yeah, that's how other systems work, maybe not JSFX. I don't really know what JSFX is doing under the hood. I got into the weirdest glitch. I don't know if you know this, but recently, in one of the recent updates, not the latest, but in a recent update, they added the option of changing the fonts on the built-in IDE. So this IDE in Reaper, you can change the font. And there is no menu option to do that. You have to edit Reaper INI by hand. And I played around with that when it came out, of course. And it's the weirdest thing, because some fonts work fine, and some fonts are displayed super weird. So font technology is complicated. In one of my favorite fonts is JetBrains Mono. And if you use that one, or at least when I tried, when the feature came out, if you render that font, it would give you like a letter spacing of like almost 2 characters. So text would look like this almost. Go figure. It's the craziest thing. Font technology is complicated. Yeah, that's a true story. Oh, so Bo is confirming the lore of creating Arial to resemble, let's say, resemble Helvetica. And let's just search for Arial to settle this. Who created Arial? Designer. Oh, it was not Matthew Carter. Okay. So Matthew probably did Verdana, right? Because I know he did one of the two. Yeah, that's Matthew Carter. Okay, so sorry, Matthew Carter, for giving you the bad rep. It was actually Robin Nicholas and Patricia Saunders who did this appropriation of Helvetica. Type designers can be a fun crowd. Very colorful stories. Arial is a bit too crude to come from the hands of Mr. Carter. Yeah, I apologize. And Gonzalez is a nice typeface for graphical user interfaces. That's true, and that's one that comes with macOS, but probably not Windows, if I remember correctly. Oh, it's the other way around. I suppose. It's a Windows only thing. Is it really? I was fairly sure it was a macOS one. Whatever. So I was saying that I was going to introduce Menlo, and I did. So let's reload this and continue playing around. Oh, not this one. This one. So we were at PT Mono. Maybe I would just take out PT Mono from as a political statement. I mean, I like the font. I used it as my coding font and writing font for a while. But it was designed by the government of Russia, if I remember correctly. It was commissioned. Maybe it wasn't designed by their government, but it was commissioned by their government. So from a political perspective, I may not include that one in the design system because it's my design system. I got to impose my political views. Yeah, Menlo works fine. I kind of like the character of PT Mono. Yeah, Menlo seems too big on this display here. But that's okay. We can just make it smaller. That's fine. Or maybe it's because I see Menlo so much. If you are doing the system fonts stack on the web, in macOS, you are going to go for Menlo. Unless the person went out of their way to install San Francisco Mono, you're going to see Menlo on the web. So you see this a lot. Can be tiresome. I think I prefer options like, I think Helvetica New is a staple. No way around that. And Arial, I think, is subsumed by that. So yeah, let's start making decisions here. I'm going to copy and paste this stuff on a new buffer. And let's start making decisions. So Helvetica was no good. Helvetica New was okay. Arial is subsumed by Helvetica. Then, we need to look at the fallback. So if I have Arial on and I put non-existent, it does change. I thought it was not going to. But it seems like it's not changing the letter forms. It's changing the line height, which is remarkable. So perhaps it's actually using Helvetica. Oh, look at that. That's unfortunate that the fallback is Helvetica and not Arial because of the whole line height situation. But I think this only applies in macOS, so whatever. So we have this one, and all of these actually look okay. So perhaps this is going to be our design system. Georgia is another readable and system insensitive font. Yeah, but I'm not gonna suggest or recommend in the design system that people use a serif font for user interface. Not that it doesn't work from a functional perspective. I mean, serifs are readable and whatnot, especially on Retina displays. But who wants to see serif fonts on user interface? It's so unusual. It gives you that weird feel of, I didn't style this, so you got Times New Roman instead. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel nice. So no serif fonts on user interfaces. That's going to be my statement. Plus, yeah, it is quite different from other fonts. Well, not on the web though, because if you're doing this system font kind of thing on the web, people will go to Georgia for serif, which is quite a common choice actually, especially on long form text. And in that context, I think Georgia works great. But I do prefer Charter, and it's also a system font, also by Matthew Carter. Anyway, what do you all think? Should we keep PT, Sans, and Mono? Let me double check that this story is even true. Yeah, it's based on a Russian sans serif. And it was commissioned. by the Russian government, but it was by paratype. But there are governments that design fonts, in case you don't know. Like Public Sense is from the design department of the government of the United States. And I love this font. It looks great. I actually use it as the main font on my day job. See? This is Public Sense. Yeah. How about we don't include PT Sams? And there you go. I mean, this guy is not a necessarily good fellow either. So if we are going to remove fonts based on politics, we can be here all day. And Helvetica was used by the Nazi, I think. I don't know. I don't remember all the stories, but I'll stop there. This is our design system for fonts. And let's check again if they all render nice. So Helvetica New renders nice. This is one of my favorites, actually. It's distinct. It's not overused. It's not too much either. I mean, Futura is okay, but I think it's a bit much. It's if you use this, I think that your effect is going to read like, I want to try to be Ableton. This is okay, but I think this is my favorite. My personal, for my effects, will be probably this one. Yeah, and this one, a bit smaller, may work well too. Yeah, the Nazi preferred Gothic fonts. That's true. But I do remember there being some connection. I don't know. Helvetica is notoriously Swiss, so they are supposed to be neutral, but I don't remember all the stories. Okay, it's time. Let's bring in this fonts into the design system. And naturally, it will be fundamental for us to identify these as fonts for macOS. So let's do font family. Is that how they call it in JS Effects? It's how you call it in CSS, but maybe they have a different name. Oh, they call it font face. Well, strictly speaking, it is a font face because we are specifying exactly which we are specifying if we want bold or italic and so forth. So strictly speaking, this is more appropriate. This is a font face when you set the font with the flags and everything. But this is going to be the font family. And then the flags are going to specify the face in the family. I am tempted to go with font family just because of the CSS familiarity. And that's something that we are playing on heavily here. Font size, line height, letter spacing, font style, text align. No, not text align. But many of these, not all of them, but many of them are reminiscent of CSS. And most people know one thing or two about CSS, right? So, yeah, let's get these names. And there they are. The lore is that they started off with Gothic fonts, but the readability was so poor that they switched to sans serifs. Not sure if it's true or not. Yeah, I think that Gothic fonts should be display only, not for body text. So maybe that's where I am remembering or misremembering this from. I wonder if I should call this Helvetica New or just Helvetica, but because most people will not even know New, but I guess they would just look into the design system and that will be fine. Okay, so these are the macOS fonts. I did something similar on my Windows machine, but it's not hooked up to the streaming thing, so I'll do the same survey, but I will do it offline. Let's just revisit this function. And here we'll need a font family situation. And this will break every use of print. So we'll have to revisit that. Oh, Bo is saying C++ question mark. C++ question mark. C++ answer exclamation mark. Yeah. What's your question, Bo? Oh, by the way. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, what is the difference between this operator, the arrow operator, and a regular dot? Okay, C++ tangent. Different topic. Let's do this. Okay. To the best of my understanding, okay? I am new to C++ too, but I will explain what I know. Maybe that will be slightly technically wrong, but it will give you the right intuition. So let's think of what a value is. A value is something like one of the data structures that we have, or a value can be many things, but a value can be one of the data structures that we have. I'll show you an example. So we have the waveform display. It is a data structure with all these fields, all 13 of them. In C++, the syntax is of course different, but you can think of this as being a data structure with all these fields. Okay? And there are different ways of actually representing this data structure. There are structs and classes, maybe even other ways. You could, I guess, doing C++, the low-level trickery that I'm doing here and just representing with an array, indexing into the array. It's not ideal, but you can. But in C++, there are better facilities for this. But in any case, suppose that you decide to represent this data structure with an object or a struct. Structs and objects are very similar. The main difference being that when you have a struct, it is like having a class, except that it is very similar to having a class, except that by default, structs members are public, and by default, classes members are not. Anyway, so you have this represented as an object. So let's say that we have our class waveform, and this is not the proper syntax, but perhaps let's say that they are all integers, just to simplify things. So this is closer to the actual syntax you would use in C++. Perhaps you would have to do something like you would have to declare this whole block public. Or perhaps you would do even better and declare this block private, and you would publicize things like getters, get image, for instance. Something like this. Anyway, It's better to protect parts of the data structure that are not supposed to be visible from the outside. But never mind all of these concerns, okay? Let's just suppose that we have a data structure with these fields, and then they can be accessed from the outside. And then this is the class, okay? So this is the definition of the data structure. Pretty much like this is the definition of the data structure. But then you can have a waveform object, and this will be a value. This is not a value. This is a definition in C++, but this will be a value. So this waveform here, it is like what happens when you call new and you get a result back. That is one instance of your waveform display. So that's an object, that's a value, so to speak. Okay, so that's a value. It exists in a place in memory. That's a value you can get to. Now, both the arrow operator as well as the dot operator are meant to get fields out of the data structure. In JSFX, to get a field out of the data structure, we use this syntax. It's a very low-level thing because we are interpreting this as a chunk of memory, and this is the index into the chunk of memory. In C++, there are higher-level facilities for accessing fields on the data structure. And there are two different ways of doing that, because it actually depends on what this waveform variable is, and that depends on how the waveform class was instantiated. So let's say that you have a function just like that, and then you have a waveform. This is probably the simplest way of having one waveform. This implicitly is going to call the constructor of the waveform class, and it's going to give you an already allocated waveform object. Naturally, this object is going to die as soon as this function is over. Okay, so we have a waveform object. How do we access the image field? By doing dot. That's how you access that field. This is the simplest example. Okay, but how about the next one? How about this next one? I will define the not main function, because that one was the main, so this is not the main one. And suppose that we are going to receive as argument a waveform. So this is not a local variable anymore, now this is an argument. Supposedly there is someone else who has a waveform and wants to pass that as an argument for not main, so that not main can act on that waveform. Okay, so in that case, suppose that now maybe there is yet another function, or maybe even main. Suppose that main is calling not main with its waveform. Okay, so far so good. There is a function calling our other function. But now there is a wrinkle here, because we have a waveform, and on this function call, we are creating a copy of the waveform and passing that into here. So now this becomes a copy of the original waveform. And this is not necessarily a good thing, because we may want to modify the original waveform, the one that was passed in. And even if we don't want to modify the original waveform, copying can be expensive. You will have to copy a bunch of things in memory, and that can take time. And it will also consume more memory. So you really don't want to copy unless you have to, unless you do want to have two waveforms that originated from the same one. That's something that sometimes is useful. You may want to have a copy or a clone of an object. But in this case, we don't want to have a clone. So now, there are different ways of doing this in C++, of course. There are different ways of doing almost anything in C++. I will start with the old way, not because it's the one you should use, but because I think that the concept is clearer that way. Okay, so what's the old way? The old way is you don't receive a waveform. You receive a pointer to a waveform. A pointer is just a little arrow pointing somewhere in memory. So you now don't pass the waveform, you pass an address to the waveform. So let's say that when you do this, the environment is going to create a waveform for you, and it's going to say, okay, now I have some free memory here in this position in memory, okay, in this number. This place in memory is free right now. Okay, so now it's pointing at this chunk called waveform that has all these fields, okay? When we are doing waveform.image, we are just fetching fields from in there. But when we are doing this, we are referring to that. We are getting literally the address in memory pointing at this place, or the place in memory where you will find this. And this is how this ampersand is how you get the address of something. Okay, so far so good. So now when we are calling the function, we are still copying something, but now we are copying this number, which is much cheaper than copying the whole waveform data structure with all its fields. And more importantly, because we have an address to the original and unique waveform in this example, we can, if necessary, modify the waveform if we want. But even if we don't want, we are just copying a number, and a number is cheap to copy. So that's all right. So that's what's going on here. And then how do you get stuff from the waveform in here? Well, you have an address to a waveform, okay? So now you have to go from an address into the actual waveform. And the way that you do that is by using this syntax. This is how you go from an address into a value. And you will get confused with the operators, okay? Because they mean different things in different contexts. In this context, I think I'm getting the syntax right. In this context, the asterisk means address of. And in this context, it means get the value from the address, if I remember correctly. Okay, so you get now this stuff is this. It's the actual value, the actual waveform. And then you get a field like this. But this pattern is so common in old school C++ and in C as well. This pattern is so common that there is an operator to abbreviate that, and that's the arrow. The arrow is just a simpler way or a more direct way of writing this stuff, which means this stuff on the left of the arrow is a pointer, so go from that pointer into the actual value and then get me the field from that structure or from that object. So that's the difference between the dot and the arrow. The arrow is just a shorthand. And I said that this was the old school way of doing things. And that's because manipulating pointers like this can be error prone and it can be just annoying. Do I have a pointer or do I have the actual thing? Do I need to use an arrow or do I need to use a dot? It can be annoying, complicated. It can be, in particular, it can be easy for you to forget to clean up stuff. So if the pointers to the waveform all die, it's not necessarily the case that the waveform itself is going to die. It may be just hanging there in memory with no one being able to look at it. And that's called a memory leak. It's a bad thing. You don't want to leave resources that you're no longer using just in memory like that. So pointers can be troublesome. So let's just briefly go over how you would do this in modern C++. You would not be using pointers like this. You would be using references. So instead of declaring a function with a pointer, you would do something like I like references. You would do something like waveform ampersand. Yeah, ampersand. Whatever. Waveform. And this, to all effects and purposes, when it comes down to the issues of copying, saving memory and whatnot, this is going to behave like a pointer, okay? It is not going to copy the whole waveform. It's just going to copy the address. It will let you change the waveform if you want and whatnot. So for all effects and purposes, this is going to act like a pointer, except that it's not called a pointer, it's called a reference, and you don't use it as a pointer, so you don't do all of that. You just use it as if this was not a pointer at all. You use it like this. That's the modern way of doing things, as far as I understand. I may be wrong with the syntax here. And now you may be wondering, how did I learn all that? Well, I started reading this book, The Tour of C++. And I am liking it. I'm liking it a lot. I am on like chapter 3 or something, not too far deep into it, but it's also a short book. And I recommend it. There are some people who don't like the way that this guy writes. This is the creator of C++, and some people don't like the way that he writes. But I kind of like it. I feel like this is the perfect book for someone like me. Because I do have experience with programming. I do know programming language theory a whole lot because I spent 7 years on a PhD on that. So I do know about all the theory and everything. I just need to know the syntax. Big deal. But more importantly, I need to know the concepts, like, and this is perfect because it's from a language designer, and it's almost, I would say, from language designer to other language designers, because it is very fast-paced. It takes a lot for granted, so it's definitely not for a beginner. But if you find yourself in a position where you do have a lot of experience with programming and you just want to get up to speed on C++, like I do, then the guy wrote a book just for you, which I think is great. So it's super fast, but it does go over all these intricacies, and best of all, it is up to date for the most part. It does refer to some C++ 20 features as upcoming, and C++ 20 is supported by most compilers, not necessarily the entire thing, but most things are supported. I wish I knew when this book was last published, but it's apparently not going to give me that information, is it? Okay, so it's from 4 years ago, and back then C++ 20 was upcoming. These days, most compilers support at least some of the features in C++ 20. So it's not super up to date, but it is up to date. It does talk about modern facilities like references and modules. Fun stuff. Anyway, so that is my best explanation, the best explanation I can make of the difference between the dot operator and the arrow operator. The arrow is a shorthand for a dot and a star. So dereference some memory, go from an address into the actual value pointed by the address, and then fetch me one field from that data structure, presumably an object in this case. I hope I did this topic justice, because C++ can be complicated. Anyway, people who know more than me on C++ are probably correcting me right now, so let's see. As I've been looking at tutorials, I've seen asterisks, ampersands, plus that arrow. It's not that confusing. It is. Especially because the syntax is overloaded. The syntax means different things in different contexts. So the star can mean different things in different contexts. On a type, it means one thing. On a value, it means something related, but not exactly the same. And then the ampersand on a type sorry, the ampersand on a type means one thing, it means reference. And over here, it means get the address off. So yeah, it can get complicated. That was a good explanation. Oh, thank you. It means a lot coming from you because you do know a lot more about C++ than I do. And you're usually the one teaching me stuff. Do note that dot and arrow are also used in C, but references are not. Yeah, true. So this whole shenanigans of stars date back to the earliest days, maybe not to the original implementation of C, because I don't know, I wasn't there in 1972, but it dates back way back to the origins of C. And there were all these issues that I mentioned with difficulties in managing memory, difficulties with passing stuff as they were not supposed to be changed by the function body, but then they are. So all these issues, and then C++ has this extra feature, references. And this is a relatively new feature, even in C++. I don't know exactly the revision of C++ that came out with this addition, but definitely references have not been there forever. They are relatively recent. And C++ moves and evolves at a faster pace than C, which is a good and a bad thing, but still, it is what it is. Right, you are welcome for the explanation, and I hope that helps. Now, let's see. Where were we? Oh yeah, we were adapting this font family situation. So I think I did all the changes I had to do here. But now I need to revisit all the places where this is used. Or perhaps not. Because I do think I have a good option, right? So check this out. What if I don't revisit all the places? What if I just come here, do some function overloading, which is a feature in C++, by the way. And I say that if I am on Windows, I still need to do this part. But if I'm in macOS or Linux, but for Linux we'll just default to the fallback. I guess I will just use Avenir. And that's that. Now, what I'm doing effectively is introducing a default value on the first parameter. This function overload has that purpose. And because I did it this way, we will not have to revisit. Oh man, we'll not have to revisit all occurrences of this. But I think that forcing you to pass a font family here can be still advantageous. So I guess I will have to revisit all occurrences of that. So the gain here is negligible. I thought I was going to be clever. I'll just have to do the work. This is an old effect, I will not care about it. Then this. Well, this served its purpose. The purpose was to experiment with the fonts, and we did. So being an over-deleter that I am, I deleted that. But over here, we'll have to select a font. So I guess the way you are going to use this is you know what? I'm going to present you on the design system with a default choice for the different operating systems, or you will have to keep casing on, am I on Windows or not? There you go. Now we have a default choice, and on macOS, people who don't care about fonts will be using Avenir. They will be making a good choice, I think. and it will be a telltale sign without even having to open the font that it's using our design or using our library. And I'm fine with that. So now we have to visit all the places where we are using print, which happens to be here, and use the default font family. In there, use the default font family. Oh, and here we have to pass. Oh, this is the frames per second thing. I would just use the default here as well. I don't care. Let's see what we changed. We changed the tests to use the default font family as well as the waveform effect. And over here, we are forcing you to pass a font family as an argument. Looking good. And it's also nice that I am giving you the default font because it shows how you can use system fonts and how you can use the the operating system detection to go and pick the system fonts that you like. So this becomes sort of documentation of how I expect you to define fonts. Use system fonts and case on the operating system. All right, let's load the test plugin as well as, all right, looking good, as well as the waveform plugin. And of course I have to respace this, but I think it looks good. It's fair. It's okay. I like this. And with that, let's see. Thanks for the explanation. On another note, have you heard from Arial? No, I have not. He told me before that he was moving in May. Way back, like months ago, he told me that he was going to move in May. I think he's moving from Montreal to Vancouver. Probably he's moving, and that's why he is not reaching out. I don't know. In any case, it is time to wrap up. It was fun talking about fonts and doing some design stuff for a change. Tomorrow I will be back here, probably without Arya. Tuesday is usually the day when we stream, but I don't think he's going to be available, so I will continue on this. Yeah, he's going to move. So even without Arya, tomorrow we'll be back here, and we will be going back to the waveform thing and trying to figure out why it's not working as it should and continue from there. But it was a fun detour to talk about fonts, and I think that we are making progress here in terms of design. All right. Thank you, Bo and Tail and everyone else who is watching this. I see you again tomorrow. Take care. Bye. Thank you for watching the stream. You know how great it has been. Or maybe it sucked, and I am glad that you stuck with me. And soon we'll all will be back together for some more coding or talking or chilling. The next time I'll be streaming.